Week 2 of the Sheldon Silver corruption trial. We are live at the courthouse with the latest developments. And then Donald Trump's appearance on SNL. It was a ratings bonanza, but the question is, will it help or actually hurt the campaign? Also, the fight to extend the Zadroga Act, which provides medical care and screenings to the first responders and heroes who worked at Ground Zero. Unbelievably, it's now in question. We will talk to a man who's made it his life work trying to help those.
Before 9/11, I went to one funeral for my grandfather. I've been now to 144 funerals. I've never seen so many people suffer.
You'll be meeting him and other folks over the course of this hour, but we begin in New York City. Good evening and welcome to RFL, everyone. I'm Richard French here. Week 2 of the Sheldon Silver corruption trial. And let's get into it right now in Lower Manhattan, where we had more key witnesses taking the stand today. Our own Dominic Carter was in the courtroom throughout, and he joins us live from Foley Square. Dom?
And good evening to you, Richard. It has been a good day in terms of the courtroom activity for the former Assembly Speaker who is facing this criminal trial. A good day until the last couple of minutes in which the plot has thickened. We'll get to that in just a second, Richard. This judge is not playing in terms of the way that she runs her courtroom. She started promptly at 9:15 this morning, 9:30 give or take, and just stopped minutes ago. She goes to 5:30 just about every day, and within this one day, beginning week number 2, as you said, the judge made the prosecution put up 5 witnesses. 5 different witnesses that went through direct examination and cross-examination and then redirect, and it all happened here today. Just minutes ago, we caught up to the speaker, and he feels that he will be vindicated. It appeared to be a good day in court for you. How do you assess how things are going?
I think, we've got to be in the courtroom. The jury will determine the good days. I believe I'll be vindicated. I believe that from the beginning, and I have no reason to think otherwise.
What is this case all about?
I'm not sure.
Counselor, what's this case all about?
Mr. Silver is confident that he'll be vindicated at the conclusion of the trial. That's what it's about.
Now, Richard, prosecutors, for the most part, as a general rule of thumb, they don't comment to reporters, and so we have not received any reaction tonight. There is a report that the U.S. attorney in question, Preet Bharara, and the speaker, that they bumped into each other. Mr. Silver downplayed that. I didn't see it today. I don't know when it happened, but there is a report that happened. Now, let me tell you this, Richard. The reason why I say a good day, sort of bad day for Mr. Silver, and we did have a couple of private conversations with him today when we bumped into him. A good day because basically you had 4 witnesses, or at least 3, that are involved in the budget process. They work for the Assembly or for the State Health Department, and they seem to indicate, Richard, under examination, direct examination, and cross-examination, they seem to indicate that there was nothing wrong to what Mr. Silver did in terms of allocating these 2 health care grants. They even went on to say that the state attorney general had to sign off on this, that the state comptroller had to sign off on this, and that it's a process that other officials looked at, and Mr. Silver, as the speaker, directed money to health care facilities, not just those 2 in question, but all across the state. Now, we're talking about $500,000. Now, here's where the plot thickened, Richard, and this is just minutes ago. A lawyer by the name of Gary Klein from the firm in question, Whitman Luxembourg, took the stand. That's the firm where Mr. Silver worked and where the clients were referred to for cancer and so on. He testified, and he's going to be back on the stand tomorrow morning, that they have 80 lawyers, 325 support staff. And now here's the issue at hand. The lawyer admitted that Mr. Silver received generally, for any negligence case that he referred to the law firm in terms of a driving case or so on, he received 50% of the fee. Half of the legal fee that came in went to Mr. Silver, and if he referred an asbestos case, he received 1/3 of the fee that went to Whites and Luxembourg. So when you add it all up, Richard, the sum in terms of for asbestos cases that he referred, $3 million. This is the pay to Mr. Silver alone, $3,366,000. And when it comes to the negligence cases, a little over $800,000. So as federal prosecutors have alleged, that's over $4.1 million. So this trial is going to be continuing for several weeks. That is it for now, Richard. Let's go back to you in the studio.
And I'm curious, John, you've known a lot of these faces for a long time, especially when the witness list that at least was submitted by Sheldon Silver. Recognize any familiar faces outside of the media here? I know a lot of folks in Albany keeping their eyes on how this trial goes down.
Excellent question, but when it comes to that, Richard, we're basically kept in the dark in terms of in the courtroom. We don't know until minutes before who is going to be the next witness when the judge says to the prosecutor, because the prosecutor is doing their case right now, the judge literally says, who's your next witness? And then the name is announced. We don't know anything in terms of who's coming in ahead. One name that we have heard is Silver's chief of staff, Judy Rapfogel, that she'll be taking the stand soon, but we don't know when that's going to be. So you're right, it's a who's list in terms of who's expected to testify, but we don't know until seconds before they actually take the stand.
And in that same complex, we'll also be having the Dean Skelos trial, the Senate Majority Leader, a one-time Senate Majority Leader, who's got his own corruption probe coming up. Dom, great job. We will be, of course, catching up with you in the days to come here as to what is going to be happening in Lower Manhattan. Dominic Carter, thank you. All right, I want to bring in Andrew Whitman, his senior political correspondent here for the show. And Andrew, there's a lot at stake for a lot of folks here. But most of all, and we talked about this on Friday, when we went through on the table the emails from Taub talking to folks at the law firm about Silver's refusal or his firms to give any contributions here to it, and that they'd find money somewhere else to pay it in effect. There was just such an unseemly attachment to how things are done in Albany. And this is one of the exchanges where the doctor says, as the Bible says, we need to get past the time when each man does as is righteous in his own eyes. Usually success is propelled by greed, envy, or both. I thought you knew that, talking about why money wasn't coming from the firm. I'll keep giving cases to Shelley because I may need him in the future. He is the most powerful man in New York State, in a lot of ways confirming the worst suspicions about how things get done in Albany, the concentration in such limited hands. You know, I know the culture of Albany is on trial here. I gotta think it's going to be hard for 12 New Yorkers to just say, at the end of the day, if it's a toss-up, that they're not going to go with throw the bums out.
I'm not so sure about that. The jurors in this case, first of all, you've got those emails that definitely are unseemly. They do not paint Sheldon Silver or Albany in a flattering light in any way, shape, or form. Or one of the bits of information that we got from Dominic about how much money Silver got from these cases, the negligence cases that he got 50% of the attorney's fees, or the asbestos cases he got a third of the fees. Also unseemly.
But you'll say no smoking gun.
It's not illegal. It's not illegal yet. I mean, it needs to all come together. And keep in mind, you're going to have defense attorneys that are telling them that it has to be beyond a reasonable doubt that he committed a crime.
Except the implication is you can't have a quid pro quo. You can't have kickbacks. That is clearly illegal. And if the premise is that there was a direct arrangement, you get $500,000 of taxpayer money to fund a study, and coincidentally the business is being referred to the law firm that coincidentally is obviously enriching Mr. Silver by a total of $4 million when it's said and done, it don't look right. You're right, there isn't a smoking gun, but if you're one of the three men in the room and all the connect the dots, I don't think it's that hard of an equation to say A to B equals Sheldon Silver.
Well, look, if you're looking for a verdict on Albany and how the business gets done in Albany, guilty. And that's just sort of, that's not in the courtroom. That's the public opinion. That's the public sentiment. And look, we've talked about Albany so many times. We've made a graphic that says draining the swamp related to Albany. The verdict's been guilty for a long time when it comes to Albany. And we have all of these Albany players who come on our show and say it's not everybody, but there are some people who make everything
and
look
let's be honest,
bad.
I asked you a question I asked them Friday. Do you think for one moment that if at the end of the day this trial leads to an acquittal of Sheldon Silver, or even a conviction for that matter, but the same rules were in place, that 24 months from now, when people aren't looking as hard, right, that you have another speaker in there, you can have another Senate Majority Leader, who knows, you could even have another governor in there. They're going to do the same thing because, there's no transparency. Even the way the money was allotted. Now, I know the Budget Committee said, oh, this isn't atypical. We had Assembly people, as you know, on the set to say, that's a little funny that nobody really knew that a $500,000 all of a sudden got divested to this. Illegal, no, but atypical, absolutely. I have no confidence that the system won't change unless it's forced to by somebody yanking the ear to say no more.
I agree with you. I think if left to if there's an acquittal or even if there's a conviction in this case, and people sort of go back to their daily business, they're not focused on Albany every single day until the next headline, as these cases, this one and the Skelos case will provide. I think most people will not forget, but it won't be a big priority for them. It might not drive their decision when they walk into the polling place and start voting for a state senator, start voting for a state assembly. And don't forget the mindset that we see all across politics, which is all of these guys are bums except my guy. And that's all the voting that anybody gets to do is voting on their local assembly member.
A couple quick hits before we got to run out of time. The more we read about this, obviously everyone's focusing on Sheldon Silver, and soon they'll be focusing on Dean Skelos. But it does boggle the mind how the Moreland Commission was shut down with so much stuff just bubbling to the surface. And neither you or I are naive as to the political elements at play at the time, but nonetheless, you kind of get it from Bahara's standpoint to say, what the bleep?
Yeah, you set on this seek and destroy machine, and then all of a sudden when it started seeking and destroying, the governor turned it off without a switch. All of these prosecutions are all what Bahara picked up the trail on from the Moreland Commission. There's a growing sentiment, I think, in Albany and among people we've talked to that say Governor Cuomo didn't think about the long-term impact of this Moreland Commission when he set it up.
And usually always plays three moves ahead.
But he was thinking about the press conference, he was thinking about the immediate political gains, and then when he realized, oh, this thing could actually hurt some of my friends or hurt me, he shut the whole thing down. That makes it look less seemly as well.
Let's talk about another guy. We just showed his picture up there a second ago. Somebody's got a lot riding here, and that's Preet Bharara.
Oh, yeah.
He was on a big winning streak here, but most recently it didn't go so well for him as it related to some Wall Street convictions. He better get a conviction, and I think with Silver particularly, but at least one of the two between Silver or Skelos.
Well, and I think Silver is important conviction for him also because don't forget the last sitting conviction. You go back to Joe Bruno, who was one of the three men in the room, and he was originally convicted, and then that was reversed on appeal. Look, this is big for Preet Bharara personally. He's not going to have the swagger of the sheriff of Albany if he loses one or both of these cases. And also, I think for the sense that Albany is rotten to the core and needs to change. He needs convictions on both of these things in both of these cases. Otherwise, people may say, hey, some selective prosecution and some people, maybe they need to define the rules better, but these guys haven't necessarily broken the rules.
And he mugged for the cameras and, of course, stay tuned and all those other lines
his
they threw
personal
out.
future and whether he's got a future in politics
you
or whatever the case
chest out, you better deliver. So we've seen the walking. Let's see.
One more thing I want to bring up, because we talked about this earlier today. There is an avenue for the people of New York to actually take action against Albany and actually change the system, and it's a constitutional convention. It comes up as a referendum.
Well, we got two ways. One is, let's remind everybody, for all the talk, these guys are getting reelected here well over 90 percentile in terms of incumbents, okay? As Andrew said, everybody loves their guy, and sometimes
but that's far less likely to change given gerrymandered districts and the fact that people...
So remind why 2017 is so important.
There's a constitutional convention that comes up as a referendum on the ballot. People have to decide whether they want to have a constitutional convention where you can actually open the door and start rearranging the Constitution of the state of New York and how everything is framed. If you want real Albany reform, you need that convention to happen, and then you need it to be focused in an area that actually leads to productive and honest reform in Albany. Those are two variables goals. One, that it passes the referendum, and two, once it does, that it actually reforms Albany in the way that's useful for people and people really want.
You almost need somebody outside of Albany to be driving what that would look like.
You really do. That could be an outside influence like others.
Yeah. And it's also fascinating, as you say, if he wants to be the agent of change here, Preet Bharara, he better be getting some convictions when it's said and done. Okay, Donald Trump, Ben Carson. Who would have thought? But they are the front runners, without a doubt, heading into tomorrow night's debate in Milwaukee. But Ben Carson continuing to take hits about inconsistencies, to put it politely, in his personal stories, which, by the way, is what he's largely running on. Guess who'll be blaming for all the controversy? Well, guys like me and Andrew, of course.